Hi, I'm Trumbull. I handle the content here at Acquira, and today we wanted to talk to you about exit paths. When acquisition entrepreneurs begin their business buying journey, they're usually focused primarily on sourcing and closing a deal, and that makes sense. It takes a lot of work to acquire a business, but it's really just the first step in the process. And at Acquira, we don't consider the job complete until that acquisition entrepreneur can exit the business for more than what they paid for it. There are a number of paths towards an exit, but they all involve growing the business first. And that may mean systematizing it until it runs so efficiently that you can sell it to private equity buyers, or it may mean acquiring more businesses to create a roll-up that can be sold for an even higher multiple or eventually taken public. I sat down with Acquira CEO Hayden Miyamoto to discuss the different exit paths available to acquisition entrepreneurs, and here's our conversation. When you look at a lot of the companies that acquisition entrepreneurs are looking at, they're selling for multiples of 2 or 3x. And that's obviously not just a liquidity issue. So why are these companies so cheap?
So the reason is, and I repeat this to people a lot. Anyone who's talked to me is going to hear me say this again. When you're buying a small business, you're not buying passive income. You are buying you're buying cash flow, which is great. You're buying a customer base and a local brand, which is great. You're buying talented techs, hopefully. But it's all held together by an owner operator who's transitioning from the business. And every small business, not every, but 99% of small businesses are the same in the sense that this owner operator is wearing 3 to 4 hats, is wearing one of those hats competently, and the other 2 to 3 incompetently. And that's the reason that the business is kind of stagnated, right? And the reason they're wearing 3 to 4 hats is the size of the business, right? So operationally, up until about probably 15 to 20 employees, you don't have a middle management layer. Everyone kind of just reports directly to the owner, right? Or the owners sometimes, if it's a partner, brothers or sisters, whatever. And if you want to grow past that, you need to add a layer of management but adding a layer of management without having enough people to report to that manager to make that manager's job full-time management, basically it hits the bottom line, right? So some people ask me, hey, what's a good profit margin for whatever, an HVAC business, right? And I'll say under 20 employees, 30%, over 50 employees, 30%, 20 to 50 employees, 15%. And they'll say, what? Why? And then you kind of need to explain, well, at 25 employees, or 20 employees even, you're kind of stuck if you don't have this middle management. But if you have a full-time service manager who's managing 3 service techs, that's really inefficient, right? If you have a full-time people and culture person who's just managing 20 people, that's a little bit inefficient. So that growth costs your bottom line.
Okay, so if you want to really grow these businesses, you need to add a layer of management, and you need to make sure that you have enough employees to justify that layer of management. That seems like a reasonably straightforward way to grow a business. So why aren't private equity firms interested in buying these companies and just doing it themselves?
What private equity wants to buy is a systematized business that they can basically, all they want to do is they want to come in and just say, I'm going to inject a little bit of capital here, give them access to credit here in this way, or maybe I'm going to play a little bit with compensation incentive structures. That's it. But outside of that, I want the existing management to just run the business. And that's the type of business that trades for between 6 and 12x. And there's a large range there. And that range is usually based on growth, right? But that's also the type of company that typically grows year over year, right? And it grows under its own weight. It's not growing based on the Herculean effort of one person. And the top echelon, the top 10% of these companies, they're pretty much all structured exactly the same way. And they all grow about 30 to 40% year over year, at least for the first 10 years or so. And they become large companies.
Okay, so what does that mean for selling these companies for a higher multiple when you eventually decide to make an exit?
So if you want to sell your company to private equity is willing to pay let's say 6 to 10x, right? If you're growing fast, they'll probably pay 6x based on a discounted cash flow in the future, which might look like 10x today. If you just systematize the deal, you are probably adding a little bit of expense, right? Because you're probably replacing that one owner's salary who's wearing 3 or 4 hats with 2 salaries that are each wearing 1.5 hat maybe, and you'll probably see in the first year it's pretty typical to see revenue grow slightly, but profits drop slightly because of this. That being said, that company, if it's even close to $1 million, is now appealing to private equity. So what you really want to do is you want to get a management run company, which means a management team is running it, ideally not the owner of the business. It's run through a budget, a budget and a forecast. The management team makes and creates their own goals, right? They have an annual plan. They have quarterly meetings. They have proper sort of people systems in place, right? They have procedure, right? Procedure that's getting iterated and improved over time. That type of business, that's worth 6x, straight up. That type of business, over $2 million in EBITDA, is worth more because you have more buyers interested. The private equity buyers that are interested in a business that's only making $1 million are usually younger funds that are probably more interested in getting their hands dirty, and that's a minority of funds.
Okay, so we're talking about exits, and to understand exits, you really need to understand the buyer, right? Could you talk to us a little bit about private equity and the way private equity thinks?
What most private equity funds, how they're economically arranged is they have basically there's a GP and an LP base, right? The GP are the people who actually, the private equity fund themselves, they manage the fund, right? And the LPs put money in for family offices, banks, whatever. And the GPs get paid by the LPs based on 2 things typically, right? One is a management fee, which is a percentage, typically around 2% of assets under management. And the other is a performance fee, which is typically a percentage of a return over a hurdle. Okay, that sounds complicated, but what it means is what a base hurdle rate, right, which might be what you get in the stock market, right, 6%, or bonds 5%, right? That base hurdle rate, the investor gets 100% of. The LP gets 100% of. Anything above that return, the investor gets 80% of, and the private equity fund gets 20% of. And this is called a 2 and 20. 2% management fee, 20% performance fee. Typically, first-time funds or younger funds or earlier funds will have less assets under management, right? They'll have under $1 billion under management. They'll probably have 100 million, 50 million, 30 million. And that 2% is not a substantial sum of money to run the whole thing. So they are incentivized by growth, right? 2% of a $30 million fund is like 600K, right? Not a huge amount of money. But if they are able to, buy deals at 4x and exit them at 7x and grow them along the way, well, that's probably looking at, that $30 million turning into like $80 million, right? And 20% of $80 million is a bunch of money, right? That's 16 million bucks. They're happy. But the way private equity truly makes money is by showing they're good performers and then doing a big fund. And so that's where the management fee makes sense. So you have your typical private equity company that's, and this is what we're trying to do, right? To be frank, because we're kind of in this private equity space, but we're not assholes. We're trying to be a kinder, gentler private equity. But if you start at $30 million and you are able to exit your portfolio at $80 million relatively quickly while giving investors a good return along the way, it's very likely your next fund is going to be $1 billion. You can go from 30 to a billion really fast, right? You'll at least go up to like, 300 million, right? And let's even look at 300 million. Now at 300 million, $6 million a year for your assets under management for your management fee is actually a pretty decent sum of money, right? And so at that point, let's even go up a bit, like just like your $1 billion private equity fund, which still isn't a huge fund, right? $20 million is a big sum of money. And what they want to do is they want to grow, they wanted to spend their money on things that don't take any time, deliver past their hurdle, and they just want to spend their money as fast as possible because they make their money on their assets under management, right? And so they need to have a good investment thesis to buy really good performing, ideally kind of passive to them companies. If you're buying something at 8x and you have access to really cheap debt, the reality is even if a thing doesn't grow, you're still going to easily pass the hurdle, right? And if you can take those things public or something over time, and if your wizardry is more on the capital structure side, you'll give everyone a great return, right? It makes more sense to do that than to spend your time on operations. So all that to say, what private equity wants to do is they want to buy easy, passive, systematized companies that are growing under their own weight at 8x, and they want to spend as much money as possible in that way, because that's how they make money. And so you, as an acquisition entrepreneur, if you want to make a roll-up or if you want to build a business to sell it to a private equity company, you need to create that for them. You need to create an enticing target for them.
Now, a big part of the exit strategy we've envisioned for acquisition entrepreneurs involves roll-up acquisitions. So could you just speak a bit about roll-ups and how AEs might use them to exit the business for higher multiples?
Yeah. Our goal with Acquira it's really to create roll-ups, and it's to take those roll-ups public. A combination of those roll-ups public. So we currently have 3 roll-up partners. We have Snowball, which is basically HVAC and plumbing companies across the country. And then we have another roll-up, which is all home services across a specific geographic jurisdiction that involves about 4 states, and another that's all home services in Texas. So the long-term plan for Acquira is we want to create the first small business investment trust, and we want to do it in the home services space. And we want to do that by basically having several roll-up partners, ending up, those roll-up partners can buy companies from acquisition entrepreneurs who want to maybe buy their businesses at 2 or 3x and sell them to them at 5x, and then eventually either sell them to the public company at a even higher multiple, or roll over into that public company at a higher multiple. So it's kind of, depending on what your goal is, you can be whatever it's kind of size fish along the way. So a lot of people are very, they're doing this for the first time, and they want to do it once, exit, make a few $1 million, and then maybe do the roll up after. And that's great. We have something for them. And in that case, Acquira or one of our roll ups will likely end up being a buyer for that person, right, at a higher multiple. And then other people do have the ambition to have the ambition and the experience to really want to grow something bigger right away. And again, that's something that we definitely want to help with, right? And so that's something that we certainly want to have equity in as well. And the responsibilities around with fundraising and issuing warrants and growing that would probably fall on us.
Now, obviously, we want to see the acquisition entrepreneurs grow these companies and either create roll-ups or sell to private equity. But how does Acquira help AEs post-acquisition to grow the businesses so they can do that?
Yeah, so we've designed a management, sort of a change management methodology over the years. That's fairly that works with often these family-run companies. One thing I've seen in the space, because I've watched a lot of other private equity companies buy companies and do their private equity thing, right? Which is often, I'm going to bring in a GM who's an industry veteran, and I'm going to wear a suit and be a private equity guy. And And what happens is a mass exodus of the staff from the company. And that's the worst thing you could possibly have happen. So our approach has been very different, right? You can hire capability or you can grow capability internally. And my approach has typically been find companies that have a good culture of people who are just, ethical, hardworking people, and invest in them. Like honestly invest in them and try to help them grow to build into, a leadership team. And that means people who have only ever, serviced furnaces are now learning management and learning business strategy and learning marketing and sales, and it's a bit overwhelming, but a lot of people they do want to grow. And when you invest, like truly invest in someone's growth, they'll reciprocate it, right? And they'll work as hard as they can, right? It's empowered stewardship. You got to trust them more than they trust themselves, right? And what ends up happening, I found, is months pass by and some people really just love it. They just eat it up, right? And they really do, they do grow into like good management material. And then other people do their best, but eventually say, you know what, I would really like it if we hired someone to help. And the only way you can go and hire an industry veteran GM after the acquisition of a business, in my opinion, and still have everyone super happy with the transition is when it's their idea.
Mm-hmm.
So in your first 6 months, priority number one is don't fuck up. That's it. Don't introduce things. Don't be a roadblock. In fact, consider yourself as the person who tries to identify roadblocks and remove them. But don't you yourself be the roadblock. And when we first bought companies, we thought, oh, there's so many things you can do. Let's introduce the ERP and the CRM and this and that. And it's exciting for someone who's like operational, but for people who've never done it before, it is a roadblock, right? It's not the thing that you introduce in the first 6 months, because you're at least temporarily, you're making their lives harder at a point in time when you need everyone to be really happy with the transition, right? So our framework is really about identifying a leadership team, ideally within the organization, really investing in them, training them, creating and implementing a lot of the procedure that we've already created for the home service space, right? So that's everything from your price books, your CSR scripts, your dispatching process, your fleet procurement process, which nobody has, your equipment procurement process, your sales training, all that stuff, right? And introducing it bite by bite over a longer period of time with the help of an extremely emotionally intelligent, empathetic integrator, which we've been identifying and accrediting along the way. But we're now working with a few people who are just fantastic. So that's how we help, is this framework. It's called ACE, Acquira Certified Enterprise. And it's typically a year-long sort of engagement involving an external integrator and all of these systems and tools that we have.
That's great, Hayden. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us about this today. Take care.
Thank you.